Hi, this is battling part 3. This is more getting into the nuts and bolts of battling, specifically looking at typings and counters. Battling part 1 and 2, they deal with more with online tools that help you figure things out. This is getting a little bit more into the weeds. Okay, before we get into the typings, which is the main goal of this tutorial, I do want to preface with success factors for doing damage in general in battle. Number one is you need to know your opponent, and you want to use the right Pokemon with the right moves against that opponent. Number two, in raids, battling with best friends will get the best boost. Ultra friends will give you a little bit of a boost, and the great friends will give you a slight boost. Every attack type has a weather that favors it and will give it a damage boost. So for example, sunny weather will boost fire type attacks, and rainy weather, for example, will boost water type attacks. Another thing to consider are the use of mega evolutions. Mega evolutions do cause a Pokemon to do more damage, and not only that, while that mega Pokemon is in battle, it will boost all other teammates' attacks at the same time. So managing your megas is very important. We're not going to cover all those details on how to do megas here, but just to point out that it's important. Okay, now on to the main point of this tutorial is to talk about typings and counters. So there are 18 types in Pokemon Go. Probably in Pokemon too. I'm not a console game specialist, but in Pokemon Go there are 18 types. These types apply to both Pokemon species and to attacks. Any given Pokemon, just look in your collection, will have up to 2 typings, and designated by the symbols. And this decodes all the symbols for you, with the 9 on the left starting with bug and the 9 on the right ending with water. Again, any given Pokemon will be up to 2 types, but any specific Pokemon will always be that same type. For example, Granbull will always be Fairy type. Dragonite will always be Dragon and Flying type. As for attacks also have different types, from bug to water. Just because a species, taking Granbull again for example, might be Fairy, your Granbull might actually not know Fairy moves. It might actually have known Dark moves. That gets us into the concept of stab or same type attack bonus. So if you have a Granbull and you want to use it as a Fairy attacker, then you want to make sure that your Granbull or you're using Granbulls with 2 Fairy type moves, because that's where it's in its element. Same thing for fighting. You know, you want your Machamps to have counter and dynamic punch for general battling, for example. You want it to know the 2 fighting moves, because when a Machamp, a fighting type, uses fighting moves, that's the same type. The attack types are the same type as the Pokemon itself, so those attacks will get the stab or same type attack bonus. And when you're using a Pokemon to battle, the amount of damage is largely based on the relation of your opponent to the Pokemon that you are using. So some types work well against other types, and some types do poorly against other types, and that's what we're gonna move on to next. Okay, so this is the counters. Again, the 9, a column of 9 on the left, a column of 9 on the right, because they won't all fit in one tidy page. You can see for the top left, the bug type. To the left of that are fire, flying, and rock. And all three of those moves do effective damage against bug. So fire burns up bug, and flyers swoop down and eat the bugs, and rocks will smash the bug. But by the same token, bugs are effective against the three on the right of it: dark, grass, and psychic. You can easily imagine bugs eating up grass. There are two interesting types to call out here. Still first column, the third one and the last one. So the third one is dragon. Dragons counter themselves. You see dragon, fairy, and ice all do effective against dragon, but dragon also does effective against dragon, right, to the right of dragon. And to the bottom, you can see that dark and ghost do effective against ghost, and ghost does effective against ghost and psychic. But by and large, it's neutral at best when same types encounter each other. You'll see more of those details later. I want to call out for counters. If you look at grass, fire, and water, these are typical starters lineup: grass, fire, and water. So fire counters grass, grass counters water, water counters fire, and you can kind of easily imagine kind of that dynamic. But a lot of other counters are a lot less intuitive. For example, fighting is effective against normal. Normal is on the right column, fourth, with the gray in the circle. You can see that fighting counters normal. Normal doesn't counter anything. It just does, by and large, neutral. In some cases does not do well, but at best it will only do neutral damage. It will not do effective. Not the same way, for example, bottom right, water, will douse fire, it will douse ground, and it will wash out rock. Okay. Normal types don't do effective against any other. But that's not to say that normals have no use, but for general battling, normals generally aren't your best types. In PvP, yes, normals have all sorts of use. We were talking about counters, but there's also the concept of weaknesses. They're not the same. They're not the same. So these tell you what don't do well against certain types. So for example, at the top left, bug again, fighting, grass, and ground do not do well. They're weak against bug. And then to the right of bug, bug is weak against poison, ghost, steel, and some others. We'll just go to the lower right corner of this chart. Water. Okay, so water. To the left of water are fire, ice, steel, and water. And those do not do well against water. Water itself does not do well to dragon, grass, and water. So water doesn't do well against itself. Fire doesn't do well against itself. Ice doesn't do well against itself. Grass doesn't do well against itself. So for the elemental, some of the elemental types like fire, grass, water, ice, even electric, dark types do not do well against themselves. But for the most part, for a lot of other types, they do neutral to each other. So look at rock, for example. So for rock, that's the right column, third from the bottom. You don't see that rock doesn't do poorly against itself. It does neutral against itself. Normal, far right, right column, fourth down. So normal doesn't do effective against anything. It does neutral at best. But normal will not do well to ghost, rock, and steel. Fortunately, it does resist ghost types, the normal one. So that's how you read this chart. Took a long explanation in case you needed to make a screenshot and things like that. So this is just an example. Guzzlord is an Ultra Beast, and a video was also made on how a couple of low-level players with a couple of Grand Bulls could duo a Guzzlord. Two even level 20s or 30s players with just a few good Gramble or Sylveon would duo easily a Guzzlord. So Guzzlord is a dark and dragon type. And if you refer to the guide in the previous 2 pages, but I'm calling it out here, that fairy is effective against dark and it's effective against dragon. So because Guzzlord is both types, it receives extra fairies do extra damage to it. I believe the multiplier is like 2.6, 2.56 or something like that. It does insane damage. And this is just one reason why it would be important to know these typings. And even if you didn't want to do the hard research, you could just look up on a guide and at least understand why it's recommending certain Pokemon. So if it's recommending Pokemon A like Granbull or Pokemon B, this all the same, use what you have or use whichever team is boosted by the weather at that time. And that's about it. I don't want to use up your whole day talking about battle, but this kind of starts to get into the nuts and bolts of things. Thank you for your attention.